Hello, my name is Frank Schorsch. This is a video tutorial on how to build a rig in 3ds Max. The purpose of this is to showcase my abilities as a CG artist and to help my fellow peers at DigiPen Institute of Technology. Some things to mention before we begin. I'll be using 3ds Max 2011. The turnaround is from Figure Drawing for All It's Worth by Andrew Loomis, and the functionality for the rig is based off of Paul Neal's rigging DVDs. Hello, my name is Frank Schorsch, and for this part of the tutorial we are going to be creating a FK spine chain. So to begin with, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my bone tools, shift into my left viewport. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because we want the orientation of the spine chain to be in relation to the curvature of the spine. So to create the chest spine chain, I'm going to start at the hips, and I'm going to build 3 bones, terminating at the base of the neck. Now you might notice I've placed these in the center of the body, and the reason why I'm doing this is because deformation is based off of the pivot of the bone. So if the bones were placed where a normal human spine chain would be, you'd have excellent deformation on the backside, but very poor deformation on the front. After you've built your chest chain, go ahead and build another chain for your neck, starting at the base of the neck, just in front of the ears, and then for the hips, starting at the center and going down into the pelvis. So now that you've got these bone chains set up, go ahead and turn on Bone Edit mode. We're going to use Quick Align, which is Alt-A, to snap these into the correct position. So I've changed the orientation of this bone, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the end bone and recreate it. For this part of the tutorial, we'll be covering how to link your bone chains together and add controllers to drive them. So to begin with, I'm going to import my master controller. Now, this is something that you want to do in general pipeline, is if you're ever going to be using things over and over again, always save a copy of them off so that you can just grab them whenever you need to. So for my dummy controller, I always use a star. It allows us to orient where the front of the rig is, and I always label them, so if you have multiple rigs in a scene, you'll be able to tell them apart. It's important to get this in here because we're going to be linking a lot of things to it. The next thing we're going to do is set up the dummies to allow the neck and skull to rotate independently. So you're going to go ahead, create a dummy, align it to the bone at the top of the chest chain, duplicate it. Now make sure that it's a copy and not an instance, or else you'll have problems. And the second one is going to be aligned to the skull. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a orientation constraint on these bones, and what it's going to allow us to do is rotate them independently of the chest. And we are going to orient them to the star controller. Going to make one final dummy down by the hips so that we can link our spine chains together. We're going to be creating controllers to drive our spine chain. To begin with, I'm going to import my cog, which is the master controller for the spine. Now you want this to be visually different because you'll need to be able to tell it apart from the rest of your spinal controllers. You're going to align it to the dummy between the spine chain and the pelvis. I'm going to shift into my top view, because when you create objects in the top view, all of the rotation values are set to 0 by default. Now for a spine, I like using circles. Now the only problem with this is that once you start rotating them, you can't really tell where they're pointing. To get around this, I'm going to convert it into an editable spline, go into the sub-object level, select one of the vertices, convert it into a corner. When you do this, it gives a nice visual indication to where the front of the controller is. Now that we've got our controller, we're going to go ahead and align it to the pivots of the bones we're going to control them. Go ahead and start there. Go ahead and move up the spine chain. Now for my skull, I don't like aligning it directly to the pivot, so what I'm going to do is align it to the center of the bone. Makes it a little bit easier to grab. I'm going to do the same thing for the 2 bones down here. As you can tell, if we had them at the pivots, they would be on top of each other and be impossible to grab. So you might notice that some of these controllers are a little bit on the small side. Now you don't want to scale them. The reason for that is because it'll add scaling information to your object. And this gets propagated down your link chains, which will cause your bones to stretch and distort, and it's very bad. Instead, if you go to the sub-object level, select the entirety of the spline, and scale it, does not add scaling information to the top level of the object, which is fine. The last thing we need to do before we finish is go to our Hierarchy tab, select Effect Pivot Only, and position the pivots of the controllers that are not on the pivots of bones and dummies. Now that we have all of our controllers and the pivots in the correct positions, we can go ahead and link them into each other. So I'm going to start with this dummy that's connecting both of our bone chains together, and I'm going to link this into our cog. Next, take the first controller above that, link that into the dummy, the bone into that controller. We're going to go ahead and follow this pattern up the bone chain. Once you get to the dummy, go ahead and link it into the nub, and the next controller into the dummy. The reason we're doing this is to create that independent orientation for the neck and skull. So once you have all of your links in, go ahead and test it just to make sure. This last thing you need is something not linked. To top it all off, take your cog and link it into your master controller. So whenever you move the master controller, you want everything to follow. This concludes the first section of the video tutorial, where we covered building the FK spine.